मैं आप सबको आग्रह करती हूँ कि हम सब मिल के वो उनका गीत गाएं जो गांधी जी के पूरे जीवन का सार तत्व है।
किसी की मुस्कुराहटों पे हो निसार, किसी का दर्द मिल सके तो ले उधार, किसी के वास्ते हो तेरे दिल में प्यार, जीना इसी का नाम है। किसी की मुस्कुराहटों पे हो निसार, किसी का दर्द मिल सके तो ले उधार, किसी के वास्ते हो तेरे दिल में प्यार, जीना इसी का नाम है।
Hello everyone. Today I bring to you a dialogue with Rajni Bakshi, the founder of Ahimsa Conversations, which means conversations about nonviolence. Rajni is also an author of several books. Her more recent book is about bazars, traditional marketplaces which she believes can serve as a metaphor for more humanistic, authentic conversations through which a new framework for economy can emerge. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Rajni. So, good evening, and I'm so happy to meet you. And I'm really excited because there are two aspects of your work and your curiosity that have primarily guided my approaching you. But also, having gone through several of your lectures on YouTube and halfway through your book, I find that there is even more than Bazar and nonviolence that's a part of your curiosity. But I think a lot of those things come together. And I want to read something to you before we start. On the 13th, which is 2 days from now, I'm going to be a part of a poetry reading session organized by a lady in Germany, in Munich, who runs an online forum called Humanity and Economics. Yeah. And during one of our sessions, somebody said something, and I had the urge to read one of my poems, and the whole tone of the conversation changed, and people started reading poetry. And then we decided we should have one session for just poetry. So as an invitation to this session, I wrote this on my LinkedIn. So may I read that, please?
Please, I would love to hear it.
Because this would be a good, almost like an intersection between your curiosity and mine. So how might we liberate making of the future from the clutches of bottom line thinking? How might we expand our consciousness beyond the field of vision constrained by self-interest? How might we fuel our imagination with our natural instinct for caring and sharing? Enough prose has been written about ideas and ideologies. How about letting our humanity translate into poetry and let poetry guide our impulse for co-imagining a convivial future? Please join Nicole Bastin, Daniel Lanyard, and I for poetry reading and dialogue at the event, A Voice for Humanity Poetry Reading. That was my invitation to people.
Thank you.
And as you can see, some elements of our common curiosity are reflected in that.
Yes, indeed.
So I have a question for you. What went in your mind when you heard, I want to have a dialogue with you? And what tweaked your curiosity for this conversation?
Well, first of all, I must say that, you're Uday Dandavate. So, and I know, not only know who your father and mother were, but I had the privilege of meeting them a few times when they were still in the prime of their, political and social life. And I mean, these were all giants of not just the search for a better India in some generalized way, but for where a better India meant social and economic, and cultural upliftment and justice. So that is one large part of it. And the other is that, quite frankly, when I saw the amazing array of people that you're talking to, I felt utterly privileged to be invited.
That's great. Thank you. And I must say that I don't, I did not select people based on their eminence. I, I selected people based on their unique contribution to just a harmonious, just society. And I think each of them have pursued their curiosity and their imagination and creativity with conviction and relentlessness. And that's how, so this is just a basket of fruits or flowers, whatever you might call it, in a bazaar of life, where,
Bahut khoob.
where I hope this archive is going to generate conversations for next 100 years.
It will. It will. And really, I mean, as you know, I run a YouTube channel myself. So I am all for leveraging this aspect of technology.
Mhm. Thank you. So
Yeah.
next question I have is, I saw one quote from Gandhi in your book that bridges the idea of Bazar with and everything that you've said in your book with the idea of non-violence, and that is his idea of trusteeship.
Mhm.
And there is a lot in that that affects every aspect of life.
Yes.
Uh, can you speak a little bit to that, please? How is the idea of trusteeship relevant to all the different ideas and ideologies that have come together in your
Yeah.
book and in your thought process?
Sure. So let's begin a little, upstream, quite a bit upstream. When I was working on the Bazars book, what struck me perhaps most was the way that the idea of the gift kept cropping up. Now, of course, I was deeply influenced by Marcel Mauss's anthropological study of what is now going to be, I think it's going to be 100 years old now, but more so by Lewis Hyde, who had written a book called The Gift, The Erotic Life of Property. Now, why is this important? Because it is through such writers that I learned that in pre-modern societies across the world, there is an idea that keeps recurring. And I will narrate it through the Maori saying from the indigenous people of what is now New Zealand. And it goes like this: that which is consumed, eaten, feeds once, but that which is given away feeds again and again and again. Now, I mean, this is not the time and place to go into every small detail of, what grows out of this. But by the time I had finished working on the Bazar's book, I was quite convinced that actually this is the fundamental impulse that has enabled our species to thrive and grow. Whereas I know that the dominant idea of our times, and our times, I think, began about 200 years ago. The dominant idea is that no, it is the selfish gene. It is our capacity to be sharply focused on our specific and individual self interest that has enabled the species to basically first dominate the planet, and the rest we will discuss later what that means. So this, then I realized, is also the essence of what is Gandhi's source of energy. Now, this is not absolutely accurate because his deeper source of energy, of course, is Ramnam. And that, if you like, we can go into that later. But it manifests in this understanding, this knowledge, this knowing that it is when we give of ourselves, when we reach out in ways that renew and reaffirm the cycle of life, that we are first of all enriched ourselves. The individual self is very real, right? It's not insignificant, it's very vital, but we enrich ourselves more when we do this.
Absolutely.
And that, I think, is the crux of Gandhi's insight, and I think it comes very early to him in life, and then he's just refining upon it in different ways, in different dimensions of life.
I call Gandhi the best designer I have ever seen in the history of humanity, because he had such a deep knowledge of the ecology of ideas and ecology of life.
Yeah.
And he's like everything that you write in your book and you speak in your various YouTube videos. Gandhi understood everything, and that's one reason why different kind of ideologues saw themselves in his ideas. Like socialists considered him socialist.
That's true.
The capitalist felt closer to him, and people who are religious minded saw his even his call for justice and fairness oriented messages not threatening to their foundational beliefs in religion or God. So he didn't threaten anyone, he included everyone, and everybody saw a piece of their reflections in him also.
Interesting, no, that you say that, because in the end, he was a threat that had to be eliminated. What you're saying is true in spirit broadly, but unfortunately, there were fatal exceptions.
Yes, I don't say he was universally accepted. I just said people of different perspectives saw a shade of their belief in them. And
that's
I think
true.
And
I just want to close for the moment, or rather wrap up the issue of trusteeship by pointing out something very more specifically in Gandhi's context. Here is how he articulates it. It's very logical. He's saying, see, entrepreneurial ability is a special skill. It is to be valued, it is to be appreciated. But it follows from that since the entrepreneur, the person with the entrepreneurial skill, has a special ability, their degree of responsibility to the larger whole becomes that much greater. I mean, it's a different way of saying from those to whom much is given, more is asked. Now, this is one aspect of it. The other is, which he doesn't put it as sharply as I'm about to say it, but I'll take liberties, that wealth is never truly private. Why? Because it's always earned in a context that you did not make. The context has been created by centuries and multiple generations of striving, of curiosity, as you say, and of creative engagement and constructive work. And therefore, Gandhi argued that even though the wealth has been accumulated because of that special skill of one or a group of individuals, it is never really truly private, and therefore it's never fully and entirely yours. It always belongs to the whole.
So do you think Gandhi, in articulating his concept of trusteeship, may have had at the back of his mind the dynamics of a bazaar?
Very much. See, because that's the other important thing historically to highlight, that he is very clear that he is a banya. He says this. He's not running away from his inherited legacy, right? And so there is that aspect of it, and that he appreciates that the process of give and take and of exchange and of conversation. Now, of course, this line is not from Gandhi, that bazars are conversations. But my understanding is that he would have fully agreed with that articulation, because
Absolutely.
he does value the basic dynamic of commerce, though he has equal faith in the gift as a form of exchange. And by here, when we use the word gift, we are not talking about birthday presents, right? We are talking about a very long tradition, which actually fills up maybe half of known human history. Because you see, settled agriculture is approximately dated to 8000 BC. The earliest evidence of any kind of commerce is not more than 3500 BC.
Yes.
So,
But
what was happening in that interim? We were practicing different forms of gift exchange.
yes, and in fact, you referred to Moss. He does talk about the very concept of gift creates three obligations, and it's a ripple effect that you feel obligated to give back, and then you again feel obligated to give back, and
That's right.
it creates a reciprocal relationship between
That's right.
givers and gift receivers. So from that
That's right.
perspective, though he did talk about gift as a gift, that
Yeah,
relates to any domain of life also.
that's right. And the fundamental premise there is that societies thrive, the individual thrives when there is mutual creativity, and underlying that is cooperation, even if compassion is lacking.
Right. So that also, I think there's a lot of things in this book that almost like I felt I've heard these voices in my head, and you probably put them down in this book. So, but I think the largest picture that I get out of this is that, and I watched one of your videos where on a large blackboard you had created a time log of human history, and
Is
in
that one around?
yeah, in which
Yeah.
where the money came into town, where bartering came into place, and that's where you also introduced the idea of Samaj, Sarkar, and market, and
Yeah.
how the place of the three has changed in
Yeah.
human relationships. And I
Yeah.
think we need to bring the focus back on Samaj. So
Yeah.
what are the elements of Samaj that you see are the most sacrosanct that will actually, in your imagination, restore some of these aberrations that have happened in the society?
Oh, well, maybe Uday, here it will be helpful if I just briefly share chronologically some part of my journey.
Okay.
So, I was at IP college when the emergency was on. I mean, I was living abroad at just before that. My father was posted in the Jamaica, West Indies. But I joined IP College 2 weeks after the emergency was declared. And so in my very formative and still, very vulnerable years, I got a taste of what it was like to feel insecure in a public place. That I think was an. And then when I came back after college in the US in 1980, I set about looking for people who were working on deepening democracy. And that took me to the Center for Study of Developing Societies in Delhi, where Rajni Kothari was, I don't know if he was technically the director, but he was certainly, the spiritual and intellectual leader of that community. And he and a few of his colleagues had launched a project called Lokayan, Dialogue of the People. And I became very deeply involved in Lokayan from the mid 80s till about the early 90s. And really, it is through the Lokayan process and all the diverse kinds of people that I got to know and meet in that period that I realized that democracy is a very downstream thing when we think of it as a political system of governance. far more fundamental is what is the state of the samaj, which means the everyday life of people in every walk of life and in every level of the very, very sharp, hierarchies that we have. And so, really, that was a formative experience. Now, today, so I'm going to jump from that to where we are today. And I will be absolutely honest with you that, Uday, I don't know anymore what it means. Meaning that, of course, there is a Samaj in the same way, there are communities, there are people living in different kinds of social formations, and one can talk to them, one can be in dialogue with them. But the arrival of the digital social media age has created forms of uh, communication, or what shall we call it, bombardment of information, um, which are producing responses and reactive phenomenon that I don't think our species has ever had. See, gossip is not new, fake news is not new. In different forms, it has been around and it has played a big role in history in some instances. But I think it's accurate to say that we have never as a species been where we are today. So I suspect that what is happening is that the very idea of what it means to be part of a samaj is undergoing a dramatic change. And I certainly am not able to wrap my mind around it. But I will tell you one small, very important anecdote, which I learned from Sunil and Chitra Sahasrabudhe, who, by the way, I think you should invite to be part of this series. You can see the Ahimsa conversation with them. They said something fascinating. They've been working with the traditional crafts and production communities for like now 25, 30 years. And they said, we noticed something very interesting, that nobody says कि मैं लोहार जाति का हूँ. Nobody says I am from the weaver jati or the ironsmith jati or the potter jati. When they refer to themselves or even to the other community, it is always to say samaj. Kumhar samaj, Julaha samaj. Why? They said because when it is samaj that you invoke, automatically it implies the search for that which is common between us. No matter how many ways we are different, no matter in how many dimensions we don't have common ground, but the striving is to locate and to thrive upon that which is the basis which we share.
Absolutely.
And what seems to be happening now, and I don't know where the technology part of it ends and where the deliberate political design part of it sets in, but what seems to be happening now is exactly the opposite, that we are pushed to make a binary choice, either like or dislike. And then the dislike is absolute in some situations. So that's my short answer is, today what Samaj means and what it is going to, how it is going to take shape over the next 10, 20 years, I'm really very puzzled, and I'm just seeking to learn as we go along.
May I share my perspective?
Please, I'm very curious about that.
So one thing, as you rightly said, that digital media, especially social networks online, have had a huge impact on how Samaj works. And I would say because of all this Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, two things have happened. Number one, we have become carriers of virus. where we don't think. We just pass on things that evoke emotion in us and mostly hatred.
Yeah.
And number two, we become more narcissist than curious.
Yeah.
So people
Absolutely.
people want to project themselves more than be curious about other people. If you see
Yeah.
a lot of conversations on social media, are either people telling how smart they are or how well dressed they are or whatever, or putting down other people.
Yeah.
Now, when I I saw a massive change in this trend during the pandemic, more so in the US than in India. I did not come to India for the entire time of COVID, but I was following all the migrants who went back to the village and
Yeah. Yeah.
oxygen crisis in Delhi and so on. But I came just immediately when it was tapering out. I came to India, but I was listening to people as to how for most people it's impossible to live at home. People are not really following the kind of distancing. It's not possible for them, and so on. So kind of people were going about their life with pain and with crisis, economic crisis, but in terms of mingling, people were out there and suffering and dying. Whereas
Yeah.
in the US there was total lockdown and people were isolated, and a lot of people got moments to reflect about the time before COVID and time, the future after COVID. A lot of people, uh, of course, the ones who were not on daily wage, who were not suffering, had the chance to reprioritize life.
Mhm.
And I was observing all that. I was still doing research remote, and then I was going out. After 3 months of COVID, I started coming to my office. I would talk to people on the street. I would go to restaurants, meet restaurant owners, workers, and so on. And I have found a new purpose that works.
Mhm.
I've realized if I can organize community events where people come together, maybe to drink wine or to just like have a conversation. And then in that process, I started reading poetry, writing poetry during COVID, a little before COVID, but during that time, I wrote 3 books. And I found poetry reading is a very interesting event where one person's poetry evokes another person's poetry,
क्या
and
बात है?
and
So
people
true.
start people start sharing their questions, concerns, curiosities, and creates a dialogue. So for the last, I would say 2.5 to 3 years, I've been organizing community events, and my hope, which is I'm now addressing your observation, is, and I wish, and I've done that in India also. I had similar sessions in Mumbai, Pune, in Cochin, uh, and in a village where Manisha works.
Uh-huh.
I had a conversation with the women who are a part of Masoom. I read
Yeah.
them my poems and they sang songs for me. Uh, and through all of this effort, I'm kind of realizing that we don't have to fight intellectual aberrations. We don't have to fight the venom that is being spread in digital media. We just have to bring people together in a social setting to do things we do naturally,
Absolutely.
passive, share thoughts, share visions, share dreams,
Yeah.
care for each other, love each other, and through that, a new future will emerge.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I know you've already spoke to you've done a recording with Ganesh Devi, but I don't know if he said this in that recording because I saw only part of it. He gave a lecture here last week in Mumbai on his new book on civilization. And I think the essence of it, and he said it exactly like this: let us listen carefully, understand empathically, and act patiently.
Beautiful.
And actually, this I feel is the essence of Samaj. See, the other thing that I've noticed, and now I have a challenge here, how to say this without sounding very, very judgmental. Okay, see, I'm comparing people of my generation with the great elders whom I saw. My mother is the youngest in her family. So I had the privilege of having aunts who were like 15 years older than her. So I really had a chance to interact with people of a completely different generation. You know, they had a strength and a kind of very grounded confidence as human beings, which I think gave them great tenacity. And not tenacity, you know, in some revolutionary, I'm going to change the world sense, but a tenacity about maybe just seeing life on a 70 screen rather than, you know, seeing life through a pinhole. And it is in their this quality of being that I sensed a gravitas. That's in English. That's the only word that comes to me. Um, in Hindi, I would say a gehrai,
Mm.
which I think made them non-fragile.
Mhm.
And I know, I see, and I think that's why so many different kinds of disagreements, disputes, disappointments, and other, you know, upheavals, um, they were able to, you know, sail through them. And these were women who were at the prime of their life when partition happened.
Mhm.
So they lived through that also. I mean, in fact, one of them lost her husband in that turmoil. So to reaffirm what you're saying, I think these kinds of gatherings are very much what is going to happen now more and more, because there is no substitute for connections of mutual caring.
Absolutely. So I have a question here.
Hmm.
Uh, I I think I'm beginning to get a sense of your intellectual journey,
Mhm.
both from reading, watching videos, and listening to you. As you read books, as you hear views of people, all ranging from Mars to Gandhi to everybody else that you have talked about, where is your real world laboratory to test your ideas? What are the activities you're involved in the samaj that allows
Ah,
you to test your hypotheses and theories?
actually, Odette, to tell you frankly, I don't think I have any hypothesis, you know, that I'm testing. I think I'm not a person of that magnitude. What I do have, however, dreams. You know, I have been, I think, not chasing, but, you know, grounding in and just feeling so privileged to have been given so many opportunity to learn from a diverse range of people. One very simple question: how should one live? Or, you know, what is the purpose of life? And there I must say that it's been really uh, a kind of, I call it grace, some people will call it luck, that I have been placed in so many different situations where that learning and that shared joy of you know, some amazing insight has been gifted to me, really. And and then I don't know if I'm quite sure that I'm not really actually testing any hypothesis, but kind of finding and then communicating many ways of reaffirming those values. And but this is the real big challenge, and trying to do it not in the spirit of a pamphleteer or of a, God forbid, a propagandist, but of a storyteller,
Yes.
and do it in a spirit of wonder and hopefully, some degree of detachment.
So one thing I would push back on is that you do have a hypothesis.
Okay.
Your book is the hypothesis.
Yes, yes, I suppose. Yes, the book does. Yeah, in that sense, this particular book is no, even Bapu Kuti, which is a collection of profiles about different kinds of people who were working in the 90s in India. And I felt that their creativity needed to be made known to far more people, etc. But if there, what do you think the hypothesis is? What are you reading into it?
What I'm going to do is,
Huh.
I almost feel is that in your book is buried a manifesto
Okay.
of reclaiming our humanity.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Well,
and
I don't know if it's a manifesto, but definitely the desire. Yes, for sure.
what I'm saying is there are elements you have not intentionally created a manifesto, but I can extract content from it and create a 10-point manifesto.
Kya baat hai?
Yeah.
I'm very happy. Yeah.
And
Okay.
I'm not, I don't have to do it, but what I'm saying is
No.
because the characteristic of your book is in the nature of storytelling
It is.
and
Yes.
not in the nature of what in corporations people do is bullet pointed action items presented in a PowerPoint presentation. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not how transformations happen. Transformation happen in Bazar, in storybooks, in movies, in poetry. That's what touches people deeply and creates conversations.
Bilkul. And if I can, I hope I'm not interrupting.
No.
That what it also does is it is only in these mediums or these ways of being that we are also able to acknowledge and celebrate the simultaneity of seemingly contradictory truths.
Yes.
And that actually is, in a sense, I think the crux of, to me, what is the Indic civilization. I'm not saying it's unique to us. And I'll explain this to you through a story that Ashish Nandi, who I'm very privileged to count as one of my mentors, Professor Ashish Nandi went to see a Yakshagana. So, it means that this story is being told is something that happened in the last 10, 12 years. And as you know, the Yakshagana is still a living tradition with its all-night performances, etc. So he says in this particular one, they were enacting the segment from the Ramayana where, Ram has got the bridge built to go to Lanka and confront Ravan and win back Sita, who is being held captive there by Ravan on Lanka. Now there's a problem. How to, you cannot use the bridge without consecrating it. For that, you need a Brahmin. And this is, please understand, this is not making any kind of, decisive statement on the actual story in some final form. But this is how the Yakshagana is depicting it. So now who is to perform the ceremony? Because the only nearby Brahmin is Ravan. But nevertheless, an invitation is sent. Now, Ravan, being a true Brahmin, cannot say no. So he comes back. He comes to where Ram and his army are. He does the puja to consecrate, or in English, you will say inaugurate the bridge. And he goes back. And knowing fully well that this army will cross over and confront him. Now, Ashish Das' point about this story is that in our Indic worldview, we have no notion of absolute evil. And that is, of course, that the persona of Ravan is so many times in so many different stories um, depicted precisely in this nuanced way.
Yes.
Um, and so I told this story to reaffirm what you said, that these subtle uh, truths of life we cannot know unless except through the um, the storytelling and poetry.
Absolutely. And because also storytelling and poetry uh, pushes you inwards
Yeah,
to examine yourself truthfully.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
most of the time you're trying to project yourself as somebody you want to be seen as, rather
Yes.
than examining who you really are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And when you
Bilkul.
move into that space while reading a book, listening to a poetry or a song also,
Yeah, yeah.
it opens you up to accept your vulnerabilities also.
Absolutely. And I think that is the crux also of our Upanishads, which are, almost all of them. Actually, I shouldn't say all or few, but many of our Upanishads are also the philosophy is strung around a story.
Yes, I understand.
Hmm.
So I want to move to the next topic that I'm curious about. Uh,
Sure.
I heard you've done 100 dialogues on nonviolence.
Well, actually, as of last week, it's 122.
Wow. So,
I think it's 22.
I'm going to ask you two, three questions, and you can combine the answers of all of them. Number
Sure,
one,
sure.
what prompted you to do this?
Yeah.
What is how did you select the people who you talk to? And number three,
Hmm.
what impact is it having?
Oh, okay. So
Both
the
on
what
you,
prompt?
both on you and people around you.
Oh, okay. That's easier. So the first part is that I firstly, for various reasons, in sometime in 2016, I decided to concentrate on the what I called at that time the story of nonviolence after Gandhi. I decided to do this as my kind of full-time engagement. Full-time means it's not that I don't do anything else, but this is now my central preoccupation. And it actually initially this idea came to me when I realized how much uh, the presence of Gandhi, not really as a person, but the insights which he is connected with which for which he is credited and which people find manifest in his life, his actual historical life, that this has had a huge, it's a living presence across the world.
Mm.
And it is that, and I also realized that actually the whole concept of non-violence and civil disobedience and building bridges, dialogue, and reaching out to the other in compassion and friendship has these methods in a very practical way have just grown and deepened in the at that time it was 70 years, since Gandhi. So this was all in the background. But when I finally actually began the work in January 2017, I quickly realized that there was a much more urgent reason for doing what I wanted to do in India, which is that we had by then already come to a point where if you raise any specific material issue, I mean, it could be big dam versus small dam versus no dam. It could be, a temple versus a mosque, or whether or not we should cut certain type of trees. It could be anything. Immediately, the lines get drawn, and there is some kind of polarization that happens. And very often, it is bitter and, if not life-threatening, definitely threatening to peace of mind. And I realized that in many of these, maybe there is a scope to find a ground where we could say, okay, listen, we will quarrel about big or small dam later, but can we agree that we are all for doing what we want to do without harming others? That's the minimum, that's the bare minimum. And at the next level of ambition is, can we agree that we want well-being of all, active well-being of all? So this was broadly the reason why I started. And then I deliberately called it Ahimsa, which is a Indic word, Sanskrit word, and conversations, so that I think the title itself speaks for its global intent and the global nature of the platform. Also, by then I had read enough to know that in this whole vast community, global community of people who are thinking deeply about nonviolence and acting on it, there's actually a lot of dissatisfaction with the English word nonviolence, which we don't have to go into here. And in fact, many people, even in the West, prefer the word ahimsa because they find that it has a much more powerful invocation. So this was why I launched YouTube. And in case anybody at YouTube is ever watching or listening, please do come. I want to again say that I'm the ultimate proof that the technology is idiot proof because I'm a tech challenged person who manages to run a YouTube channel. Now, once this was all decided, actually the selection came naturally because I knew from the beginning that I would not limit myself to, the kind of only the activist at the barricade. So there are people who are scholars, philosophers, even there's a whole segment on people who have worked, in a sense, people from the Bazar's book, who are concerned about, who are worried about the structural violence of our macroeconomic system, and have tried to find answers to it, have tried to find ways of humanizing those systems. And I was deeply, deeply blessed to begin the series with Samdang Rinpoche ji, who is a venerable monk of the Tibetan tradition. He has been the speaker of the assembly, the Tibetan parliament in exile, and then later their first prime minister also. Because as you know, the Tibetans in exile have a elected parliament. So that was a great, so I feel that the whole effort is blessed because his was the first conversation we carried. Now, impact I'll start with myself. I mean, it's been a lifesaver for me, honestly, in the sense that, at a time when it would be so easy to get depressed and disheartened by what is happening around us, um, it gives me that anchor. And I think if you must know this very well, that and there's so much documentation on it, that when people are living in very stressful times, you need to do something in your daily or weekly existence, which anchors you. So that's the first. And of course, I mean, in terms of intellectually, it gives me constant reaffirmation that this too is a powerful possibility. It is a very real dimension of the human condition. It's not something peripheral or, that only saints and goody people can do. No, not at all. It's as much, in fact, now I don't want to argue about it here, but if you see some of the conversations, there are, scholars and scientists and historians who are explaining to you why actually nonviolence, as equated with compassion and cooperation, may have had a much bigger role in our evolution than violence. So I don't know if that adequately answers your.
Yes. Well, how has it affected others?
Yes, thank you. I forgot that part. So if you look at it in number terms, we've just crossed 2000 subscribers, which I know in the universe of the YouTube world is nothing. But I must tell you, for me, it's a big deal because I never thought it would reach even this point when I started. But honestly, the numbers are not why I'm doing this. So the most endearing effect, I prefer not to use the word impact, is that, every now and then, very often, some friends and some completely unknown people will reach out to me and say, just knowing that you do this every week keeps me going. It helps to keep me going. I'm not saying this alone. And that knowing that I'm going to get because I have a little broadcast group of some 900 people. And of course, the subscribers are perhaps largely separate. So they get the ping in their mailbox. That it gives people comfort just to know that this too is happening.
I get it. So one question which relates to what you learned in the process of answering my question, you said that this whole experience of listening to people has reaffirmed some of the thoughts and ideas and values that were forming in your head.
Yeah.
So besides reaffirmation, did you learn something new?
Yes, the difficulty of actually doing it. See, we know philosophically, mostly from Buddhist psychology, that the self is not something fixed. We are constantly, the self is arising, and, there are many selves rising. We know that. So, firstly, the struggle is with your own self, because anger and insecurity are very natural human conditions. So the first challenge always is within yourself. How are you processing that? And so what I've learned, again, this is not a new learning, but it's a powerful reaffirmation that maybe the first form of nonviolence is to be kind to ourselves. And that means that we must not be indulgent towards our feelings, like, I'm not at all saying that we just shrug our shoulders and say, oh, well, I'm like this only. But that learn from the failing, renew the resolve, and get back to work.
I get it.
In that spirit.
Okay.
So that's the main one. That, and I'm, again, amazed at the diverse ways in which people journey with this.
I like it.
Yeah, and I find new evidence for it all the time.
I have an interesting exercise in imagination for you.
Bolo.
Yeah. The exercise is you're going to organize a real world event.
Okay.
In which there's going to be a Bazar conversation. That in which everything that we are missing today because of a variety of reasons will not happen, but something more authentic, more dynamics of Bazar will play out without any intentions to achieve certain objective. But so my question to you is, where would you like to organize this real world event?
Where you mean as a place?
Yeah, who would
geographical location?
Yeah, well, physical location. Who would you call and what would you do?
Oh my gosh. I mean, that is a big one. I have not, because I want to I would need to time to think about it. I don't think I can immediately think of anything.
Okay, instantly, what place comes to your mind? Your mind is good at connecting the dots. Connect all the dots, and what place is the most conducive for bringing people together like this?
But I think the banks of a river for sure. It would be the banks of a river. It would be the banks of a river, And the purpose actually, I think, would be to meet in joy and fun, through multiple forms of expression. Maybe it'll be like a mela, really. It should be a mela.
Mhm.
And rivers, because, not because of the old things, civilizations happened on the banks of rivers. I mean, that's a material fact. I think above all, that constant flow of the river is such a comprehensive metaphor, for existence. And
The-
also वो जो पार करने वाली जो बात है, how much of our poetry, I don't know if it's true of other languages and other cultures, but here in India, so much of our poetry is about the crossing. In
Yes.
fact, I think
Even Siddhartha.
Rajmohan ji, has written the book itself is called The Boatman.
Yes.
And see also that I'm not a scholar, so I don't know whether this is older than the Bhakti movement. But हमारे यहाँ, the concept of life as a bhavasagar, I don't know if you're familiar with
Yes.
that.
Yes.
है ना? So it is that life is an ocean of emotions. And in fact, so Tulsidas becomes very important, right? For this reason. वो उनका जो ग्रंथ है, its name only is Manas. Ramcharitra Manas. Matlab, I've always in the Ramcharit Manas, he describes it as a Mansarovar, right? If I have understood it correctly, I could be getting this wrong, but this is how I have absorbed it. So ye jo this ocean of emotions or river of emotions with its waves that we are trying to cross, maybe that's why I thought of a river as but it has to be a real river,
Yeah. Yeah.
which has not been which has not been stopped.
Not an image of river like I have a image of Bazar behind me.
नहीं, इमेज का सवाल नहीं है. मेरा मतलब है कि there are very few free flowing rivers left in the world.
I know. You did an amazing visualization and you actually answered my question in a very creative way. So thank you for that. Though you started off saying
You encouraged me when you said what is the first thing that comes to your mind,
yes.
then I realized.
Yeah, you were trying to intellectualize and you were not tapping into your intuition.
I must tell you, one of the great privileges of my life is that I was given a chance to serve as a trustee on something called Jan Sahयोग Trust, which was formed out of the Right Livelihood Money Award that was given to the Narmada Bachao Andolan. So it was such an enormous privilege because twice a year I got to go to the banks of the Narmada for the board meeting.
Wonderful.
Because Baba Amte was living on the banks of the Narmada.
Yes.
And I mean, there were many occasions to go to the banks of the Narmada, but in the even in the earlier phases of the struggle. But yeah, actually, I would have ideally liked to spend my whole life on the banks of a river, but the next best thing, I suppose, to that was that I got to spend many days on the banks of the Narmada.
Right. So my next question is, people like to attach tags to ideological tags to people. Yeah. Are you left? Are you right? Are you a socialist? Are you a communist? Are you Sarvodai? And so on. And people categorize you, put you in that box, and you begin to believe you belong to that clan. Have you had that experience? Have people seen you as belonging to a certain clan, or do you see yourself belonging to a certain clan?
Well, I'm very fortunate that I do indeed feel that I belong to a extended community of fellow travelers. That I cannot imagine that I could have even reached as this far without them. And many of them, some of them, I mean, are already your guests, but there are many more. So this labeling thing, however, I've always been reluctant. I mean, I know that many places I get introduced as a Gandhian. And certainly Gandhiji is a very profound and central influence in my life. And if that is what it means to be Gandhian, then yes, I am. But it's not a limiting label. It may be in some people's mind, and I never lay claim to it, but I don't run away from it when somebody calls me a Gandhian, as long as they are very clear that I'm not fully vegetarian and occasionally I can enjoy a drink. And if I can, if they still feel I'm Gandhian, then I'm happy with that. But
No,
see, the thing about labels is actually that I think it's a commentary on the public discourse. I don't know why and how it has come to that. But today we are unable to get to the person whom really we should be interested in. We keep quarreling with the label that we think is attached to them.
absolutely.
And that truly is a pity.
So you said you have been lucky enough to be a fellow traveler with certain kinds of people. So if you look at all of those who have contributed to your curiosity, your intellectual growth, and your being, sense of being, what are
Mhm.
those qualities and characteristics, common qualities and characteristics that you would define for this group of people who have been your fellow travelers?
The first, of course, is I think this is the most central running thread. I think there's been a genuine um, longing for the well being of all. Very deeply felt and very deeply held and in an active way. Um, whether it was Medha and see, it was visceral when she used to say that, I wish we could just somehow save all the people whose lives, whose homes, whose entire collective memory is being washed out, is being wiped out. Um, from there to, like Professor Daya Krishna, who again I was privileged to count as one of my mentors. He was a great philosopher, um, who would just laughingly share such, deep insights. So, Dhirubhai Sheth, who, DL Sheth, who, it was from him, that I learned that this very black and white narratives of the past are never true. Even when they are narratives that are trying to cultivate outrage over injustice and uh, life is never black and white. It's very complex, and in fact that's why maybe there is a kind of reactive need to paint it as black and white, because that is so easy to deal with, and complexity is troubling. It it maybe there's a fear of getting lost in the gray areas.
Yes. What will remain from, what would you remember from this conversation?
Well, we'll take away a nice feeling of, gosh, it was nice to look back on, this flow of time and striving. And I think there is a takeaway, which is that I'm so glad that you're celebrating curiosity. That's actually, the crux of it, because there's too much of very easy and, facile knowing.
Yes.
You
Yes.
forgot
Yeah,
Vivekananda.
Tell me about Vivekananda, of course. Yeah, because you had a whole book on him.
So, do you know that basically my engagement with Vivekananda began in 93 January, when somebody alerted me. Otherwise, it was not something that, was very much in the air. But a friend alerted me that in September that year, by the way, we are talking on the day of the Chicago address.
Wow.
Well, at least, yeah, even for you, it's 11th, right? It's in the morning, yeah. Today is the day when Swami Vivekananda stood up at that conference, the Parliament of Religions, and made that first speech. It is also the day on which Gandhi first used the word satyagraha
Nice.
in South Africa. Which, of course, I mean, lots of people have written about this, because we know what 9/11 is otherwise associated with, unfortunately, which, naturally dominates our consciousness now. So in 1993, when I realized that it was the centenary year of that address, I became very troubled because we were all, still reeling from the trauma of the demolition of the Babri Masjid in December 92. And I said, what does this mean? That on the one hand here, because, immediately I went, I looked up the speeches, and all three, I think it's four speeches at Chicago are about the natural unity of all faiths. And that how he felt, and he knew, he didn't just feel, he knew that the Indic legacy is a very vital contribution to this quest and this journey for the whole species. And yet this thing had happened in, in December 92. So I decided so I was driven by curiosity, firstly, and then it became sort of my therapy. And truly, just going and buying. At that time, you had to go out and buy a physical book, remember? So I just went and bought the 8-volume collected works and jumped in. And it was so, it was troubling also because, he is, uh, he's struggling with some of the terrible realities that make up Indian life in 1880s, um, uh, which is when he wanders about, right? His travels across India is what I'm referring to. But no, on the whole, I think it saved me. It saved me from, becoming bitter. It saved me from being perpetually, scared of the future. Because I think we all knew by then. After December 92, I remember several of my peers, we would exchange notes. We knew that now this will dominate the rest of our adult life. That we knew. We knew it wasn't going to go away. And that was a very depressing realization, because that was not at all the the expectation or the projection which we had lived with through the 80s. We were on an upswing, we were going to deepen democracy. We were doing it. So many friends and colleagues were doing it in real time, in real tangible ways, from the ground up. So Vivekananda ji really saved me. And then, of course, thanks to Vivekananda, I found Ramakrishna Paramhans.
Since Vivekananda is being co-opted by the proponents of Hindutva right now, I want to put on record the reality of who Vivekananda was for posterity, for the people who would be watching these shows in the future, the next generation. So
yeah.
tell us something about Vivekananda that won't be written in the new history books that are being written.
First of all, let me just say that I have friends in the RSS. I mean, not close friends, they're not personal friends, but I have been in contact with, and I've tried to maintain dialogue. And as one of them once said to me very painfully, he said, for a lot of my life, I've lost friends when they discovered that I'm sympathetic to the RSS. And so I want to first of all state that whatever differences we may have on interpretation of and reading of history, etc., exclusion is exclusion. And I think we should, whenever we become aware of it, we should step back and, and really take some corrective action and try in our own hearts, firstly, uh, to not at least be part of it, even if we can't always stop it from happening, which we, even though we try. So now, so I really do understand, I even sympathize with why Vivekananda is an inspiration for many people in who share that worldview, because he is deeply disturbed. Vivekananda Swamiji is deeply disturbed by the state of the Hindu Samaj in the late 1800s. And so that part of it I can understand. Many people who feel that even today relate to that side of him. But that's a small part of his story. The bigger now here my perspective comes in. My perspective is that he became what he became on a world stage because he had overcome those feelings. Not totally. Because remember that when he arrives in America, he has a very hard time, and he has to undergo many humiliations before he finds a community of supporters and admirers who then enable him to at all be on the stage at the Parliament of World Religions. Because what a bold move. I mean, talk about self-confidence. Imagine, he has no invitation. He doesn't know how he'll get into, not only as a speaker, how he will get into the conference, but he goes, and, it is many levels of energy and blessing that make it all happen. Now the struggle continues with him. And I think that is why we all need today to look at his life more carefully, not in this, who is using him for what. All use is actually, who says this is Sister Nivedita, his disciple. She says worship is the antithesis of use. So I think all uses, quote unquote, are perhaps an injustice to him. And the story I want to tell is much later. It's much closer to maybe his last few years. And it happens in a temple, I think somewhere in the Kashmir side. It's a demolished temple. And this is his own account, right? He narrates this to Sister Nivedita, and she writes it's in her collected works. That, he tells her that I had a wave of anger and grief arise in me. And I said, Mother, he's addressing the Devi Kali, how can you let this happen? How can, you let your temple be destroyed? And she replies, she asks him a counter question. She said, am I your defender or are you my defender? And in that moment, that whole sense of grief dissolves. And in a sense, this is my understanding of it. I don't have the text in front of me just now, but I remember it because he becomes recentered. And I think this is his, not just literally the story, but this whole struggle and overcoming it is the essence of his journey. And I think that is why, the voice continues to reverberate to us, what now, 120 years later.
I'm going to give you another exercise in imagination.
Oh gosh.
Last
Okay.
last one. I know. Uh, Imagine Vivekananda were alive today.
Mhm.
What would he have thought or written about Ram Janmabhoomi Andolan and demolition of Babri Masjid?
So, this is a question that many people like to ask, and I always refuse to engage
That's fair.
because I refuse to do it in case of Swamiji. I refuse to do it actually pretty much for anyone because I feel very strongly that anything that one says is an extrapolation out of our own mind. We cannot know, what a person who we know only through their written word. We've never met them. And forget that. I mean, even your own friends who are living now, you can only guess at what they would say in a specific situation. So on principle, I don't engage with this exercise. Now, of course, as we are uh, so much further down the road of distress, um, let us not narrow our thinking and our aspirations to specific quotations either way.
I agree with
Yeah.
you.
Instead, let's just stay focused on the fundamental values and how they can be manifest here and now. What is good? In what path do we visualize that there will be dignity for all, well-being for all, and what will be conducive to the um, flowering or at least the enablement of mutual creativity at the very least, and love and compassion in at the more ambitious level.
I think that's a beautiful way of concluding this conversation. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, but just